Welcome to Awakening Within. I'm your host, Jill McPherson. And on today's show, we're going to take a focus on religion. We're going to take a focus on seeing if we can demystify some common myths out there about religions. And I want to start off, though, with sharing how it is that I came to have my guest today. Last year, I went on a retreat called Encounter World Religions. And it was a week-long event down in Toronto where I was able to experience learning about 11 different religions, and not only learning about them, but actually experiencing them. So we had the luxury of going into temples and different areas of worship and learning about the religion, participating in rituals, and it was ultimately life-changing. And the director of that Encounter World Religions retreat is here with us today. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you could come. So I wanted to have you come because that experience was so profound for me in really shedding light on the different belief systems out there, the different rituals, kind of like why people dress the way they do, or look the way they do, act the way they do. And I just found it really increased my level of compassion for them. Tolerance is maybe the word I want to add to that too. And so I just wanted the viewers to have an opportunity to figure out, how did this retreat all come about? How did it start?
Yeah, and it wasn't me who came up with this. I don't think I ever would have thought of it. It was the founder of the center, James Winland, or J.W. Winland, as many people knew him. He came to Toronto in around 1984 and 1985. And he was very curious. He was always curious about different people and their ways of life. And he just started walking into Zoroastrian temples and Hindu temples, and then he'd find a Wiccan coven. And needless to say, in 1985, not a lot of people did this. Even today it's not common, but it's become more common since 9/11. Back then it was quite uncommon.
Right.
And he grew up in the American South, big man, white man, southern accent, Hindu temple in Toronto in 1985. Yeah, he stood out.
Yeah.
He stood out a lot. And by the time he showed up the second and third time, people certainly took notice. But he was so obviously just interested in them. He came from a place of respect and curiosity, and he literally befriended them. They became friends. And he learned more. Then he took studies. He read books. He went to university and took courses. And pretty soon he became sort of an expert.
Right. So, but he was doing it from a place of curiosity, he wasn't like looking for a religion himself.
No, he wasn't. But he was just curious. He was always interested in the different ways that people live their lives. And I think part of it was, I would say, a bit of a personal journey, not looking for a new religious home, but just curious about how people answer the questions of life.
Right.
So that's sort of how it got started. And then, people found out he was doing this rather odd thing and said, would you come talk to our group? And he did. He was a gifted presenter and speaker. And so he spoke to groups and eventually said, well, would you take us with you?
Right.
And so eventually he said he was taking his friends, the people who asked him about it, to meet his friends, the people at the Hindu temple, the Buddhist temple, the Zoroastrian temple.
Right.
And from that, eventually, the center, the Encounter World Religion Center, was born.
Right, and so that's where you're employed with the Encounter World Religions.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so about 2000, I was in a career transition. I was going to school, and I had some spare time, and I was put in touch with him. I'd already had an interest in the topic, and I found out that he needed someone to work part-time, and I thought, oh, that would be neat. So I just figured I'd do this part-time for a year while I was in school. But then I got hooked.
Right.
I actually got hooked basically doing a version of what you did last summer.
Right.
So that was what reeled me in.
Right. So you found yourself very curious too, and understanding.
Yeah, and like him, then I started reading loads of books. I would go to these places and observe their rituals. I would go and watch prayer time at the mosque. I would meet the imam. And then since then I've done a lot of studies. I took courses at university. I now have a master's degree, and I'm doing my PhD at the University of Toronto in religion, which will hopefully be done in the next 100 or so years.
Yeah, that's right. On the to-do list.
Yeah,
good. So this retreat then started, then how many years ago would you say it kind of started?
I would say it started in the late 90s. He probably did one, 97, 98, something like that, another one in 99. And then since I've been around in 2000, it's been an annual event every July.
Every July.
Yeah.
And it's it's based out of the University of Toronto.
Yes. Yeah, we hold it at the University of Toronto, and basically in 7 days we explore 11 religions.
Okay.
For each religion, there's a combination of class and site visit. So you start off with a class so that we can tell you a little bit about what is Sikhism, who is the founder, what will you encounter when you walk in,
Right.
whatever its beliefs and practices. And those classes are taught by me. And then we go out to the house of worship, and there I sit in the back, and in most places, and I hand it over to a leader of that community. So we meet the imam or whatever. We go to the Gurdwara, the Sikh temple or Gurdwara, and we eat with them because eating is integral to their faith, which I would have explained in the class.
Right, right.
And we tour their facility, we observe worship, and actually at the Sikhs, we go at nighttime because we watch them put their holy book to bed, which is a particular ritual that, of course, most folks have never even heard of.
Right.
So we get to go and observe it. And at other times, of course, we're going to mosques. We go to 2 Buddhist temples, one that's big and elaborate, another one that's quiet where we do meditation. We go to an Orthodox Jewish synagogue with a cantor who's hilarious and engaging and smart.
Yeah.
And then we go to a liberal synagogue where we actually go for the Shabbat service on Saturday morning. And so over the course of the week, we try to explore what we call the 4 Ps, the people, the places, the practices, and the philosophies of these diverse traditions.
Right, right. And so having that talk ahead of time, I know I appreciated not only knowing about it, but being prepared, because I just think back to, JW showing up, just walking into a temple. I'm not sure I would be that brave.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to, offend somebody or come in at the wrong time or be ill prepared or not dressed properly. And so it was nice for us to have that opportunity to know, okay, we're going in here, so, head coverings or no head coverings or long sleeves or short sleeves or whatever. So people who are coming then can be rest assured that they will, be told appropriately how to dress or what to do or what not to do.
That's right. People are often hesitant to go in because, as you say, you don't know if you're going to offend. You don't even know if you're welcome sometimes, and you don't know what the protocol is. So we can sort of act as the guide. We've been to all these places many times. Even just having us there, I think, sort of provides a sort of sense of comfort. And yes, we can say, okay, and here for tomorrow's day, you'll need to dress this way. And then when we go in, I remind you'll take your shoes off, and they know that we've arranged a guide, and so it's comfortable to go in.
Right.
And then actually, after the week, once people have been in a mosque once or been in a Hindu temple once, you find that their ability to go later is easier. And we often hear from people who say, I went back. I went back to that place.
Right.
So we can sort of open the doors.
Right. And open the doors. I love that analogy, because that's, opening doors, bringing down walls and barriers to our, misbeliefs around with each other. What would you say after retreats, getting feedback from people who've experienced it? What do you sort of commonly hear people's response to it?
People love the week. And then we've been taking feedback forms for the past 15 years. And interestingly, it's always hard to market the week because we've had 90% of people say that it exceeded what they expected. Mm-hmm. We've never been able to, how do you explain an experience? So people say things like, I felt like I toured the world without leaving Toronto. Because you go into these large Sikh temples. I mean, the great thing about, the thing about this program is if you were going to do it in any city in the world, you would probably do it in Toronto. Mm-hmm. It's only in Toronto that you can not only go to a Sikh temple, but it is large and filled with people. Mm-hmm. You can go to some of the most fantastic Hindu temples. So people talk about that. They talk about things like, the next time I see someone who's Sikh, I'll say hello. I remember we had a university student who wrote us a month or two later and said, I saw this Sikh guy in the mall back in Florida. She had come up from Florida for the program. And she said, before I would have averted my eyes, but I looked them in the eye and I smiled and I said hello. And sometimes we've even taught them certain greetings that they can say. I've often said it is amazing what a difference it makes just to have once walked into someone's building and not only to do all of the important stuff you do there, but honestly to sit there with the imam and complain about the heat or the traffic. It's just the next time you go by that building, you go, oh yeah, I've been inside there. I know what goes on inside there. I've seen those people. And so it's, as you say, it changes the relationship that people have with people from these other communities.
Right. And I know too, for me, what I observed was that it also has an impact on the communities or the churches or the religious groups that we enter.
Yes.
I mean, for them to see, a busload of people want to come in and ask questions and be sincerely interested. What do they tell you about the experience?
Yeah, I mean, they very much like it. I'm thinking of the imam in particular.
And the imams from the
mosque,
from
yes,
the mosque.
from the mosque. Actually, the founder, J.W. Winland, passed away this past year, and the imam, my friend Imran Ali, came and spoke at the memorial for James, and I remember him saying, he said in the Quran, there's a famous passage. It says something like, "Mankind, we've made you into different tribes and peoples so that you will come to know one another." And Imran said, I knew that passage, I'd read it, I'd studied it at school, but I never understood it, he said, until I ran into JW. Because JW brought people from different walks of life into that mosque over and over and over and over again. And now they have a kind of outreach program. They open their doors, they try and take advantage of things like Open Doors in Toronto, and every once in a while they say, can you bring another group?
Right.
So I think it's really, for these groups, it makes them feel comfortable and welcomed, and that they can reach out to the society. So,
right.
yeah.
Right. And so it breaks down barriers for them too, because some religious groups are thinking that they're either isolated or being, thought negatively of, misunderstood. And so it's bringing down their own prejudice walls themselves that they have in their own culture.
Yeah, and just the fear, right? The fear that you won't be accepted. But if enough people come through the door and are happy to see you and thank you afterwards, it just changes the sense of belonging, right? We all need that. We need to belong. Canada's a country of immigrants. So, it's an ongoing process to keep making everyone feel comfortable with each other. So.
Right,
yeah.
right. So people who are interested in this retreat can contact you through worldreligions.ca.
That's right.
And is that the best way?
Yeah, that'll take them to the website. On the website, there's something called the July program, and if they go to the July program, there you can find a schedule that actually shows you the day-by-day itinerary that people often find particularly helpful, as well as just a description of things like what we'll do and what the cost is and stuff like that.
And accommodations, they find their own accommodations while they're there.
That's right. We have a link at the bottom that talks about some accommodations at the university that are inexpensive, university dorms.
Yeah,
but as well, we mentioned things that are nearby that are more comfortable for people who have more money. Other people drive in every day, or they have a friend in Toronto. But the registration fee basically takes care of all the programming and all your food, 3 meals a day, all the bus transportation, everything except accommodations, essentially.
Great.
Yeah.
Wow, it's awesome, and I can't say enough about it. It was such a life-changing experience. And we'll be right back talking more about Encounter World Religions. Welcome back to Awakening Within. On today's show, we are talking about religions. We're talking about a retreat called Encounter World Religions, and I have the director of Encounter World Religions with us, Brian. And before the break, we were talking a lot about a retreat that you can look into on worldreligions.ca that happens every July, and I strongly encourage anybody who's interested in understanding other religions to look into that. But now we're just going to focus in on a specific religion. And Brian, I was saying when I was on the retreat, one thing that stuck out for me was when we attended the Muslim temple and during prayer time, and asking questions, and I just felt such a connection to these people, and really felt like for the first time I saw past their stereotypes. I saw past the clothing, and just saw, wait a second, these people are human just like us. And like most of us, at some point in our life, we might be stopping to ask the big questions, like why are we here? What's the purpose? And so I felt that connection, that they're just another group of people who are, seeking answers to those questions and needing a a belief or a platform to function their life from. So maybe we could just start there. And what would you say, though, sort of in general? I know it's a long, complicated one. We had our lecture on Islam. It was quite lengthy, and we don't have the time to get into that. But in general, what would you offer to the viewers on sort of explaining in a nutshell what the Muslim faith is all about?
Sure. Islam starts in the 7th century with the Prophet Muhammad, who receives a vision and sees himself in the line of biblical prophets, Jewish prophets and Christian prophets, and receives a revelation that becomes the Muslim holy book called the Quran. Quran actually means recitation because it's believed to have been sort of dictated by God. Muhammad is like a tape player who just recites what he is given. And the religion of Islam, the word Islam, the Arabic word Islam, is related to the word for peace. And so Islam is supposed to mean the way of peace or the way of submission, meaning to submit to God. And as you say, it's a complicated religion with lots of things. Often the heart of Islam, besides following the message of Muhammad and the message that's recorded in the Quran, is kind of captured in what are called the 5 pillars of Islam.
Okay.
They're kind of the pillars or cornerstones of the faith.
Okay.
So the first one is the Shahada. The Shahada is the declaration of faith in Islam, which says that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. And if you say that out loud in front of witnesses, and knowing what you're saying and meaning it, that makes you a Muslim. It functions the way that a Christian baptism does. It initiates you into the faith.
Okay.
So that's the Shahada. The second is Salah, which means prayer. And so Muslims pray ideally 5 times a day. They stop what they're doing. They turn and face Mecca, which is their spiritual center, and then they submit. Islam means submission, and so you submit by putting your prostrating and putting your face to the ground, as you say Allahu Akbar, and you do a series of postures. Prayer takes 7 minutes maybe. So you do that 5 times a day. That's the second pillar. The third is the zakat, which is the charity. You're obligated to give a portion of your savings every year to the poor. You can give above and beyond that, and you can give to the construction of a mosque building, for example, but there's a certain amount you're obligated to give to the poor every year. The fourth is the fast, and that is, many of your viewers will probably have heard that Muslims fast during Ramadan. So for a month, during daylight hours, there is no water and no food and no sexual relations during daylight hours. And so it's a time for the community to come together to sort of be aware of how much we have by going without. And they go through an ordeal together, and it's very bonding. They come together at night to eat, and by the end of the month, they really feel like they've been through something together.
Right.
And so that's a fast. And then the fifth one is the Hajj, or the pilgrimage. And again, some of your viewers will have heard of this. Once in your life, if you're Muslim, at least once in your life, if you have the money and the health, you're to go to Mecca to go on a pilgrimage. It's a few days long, and it's a pilgrimage again to the spiritual center.
And Mecca being, in case some viewers don't know where that is.
Yeah, and that's in Saudi Arabia, and it's the city where Muhammad was born and raised.
Okay.
And it's also where there's the most holy site in Islam called the Kaaba. It's a 4-story brick cubed building covered in a black cloth, and it is said to have been built by Abraham. And it's the center point of worship. It's where you face when you pray, and when you go on the pilgrimage, you actually walk around the Kaaba 7 times.
Okay.
And so it's the spiritual center for Muslims.
Right. Okay. So that's a lot.
Yeah, no, that is a lot.
That's great. So then let's just talk about some of our, perhaps some misunderstandings we have as a culture where if we're not involved, we don't know somebody who's practicing the Islam faith. One thing we can identify often is that women have their head covered. And is there something in the Quran, or why is it that women have their head covered?
Yes. So like in any faith, there are debates. In the Quran, it says that women should dress modestly. It is not entirely clear that that requires the covering of the hair. But there are some sources in Islam that say that early Muslims were taught to do this by Muhammad. There are Muslim women who think you don't have to cover your hair, that it developed later, but the kind of dominant perspective has been this understanding that it started in the time of Muhammad and that you're following the request of Allah or God.
Oh, we're just showing some pictures here of different various head coverings of.
That's
just
right.
to get what we're talking about.
Yeah,
here.
and as you can see in those pictures, usually it covers the hair. There are different styles. Some of them are very fashionable and loose headscarves. Most of the ones there are more traditional, covering the hair and
the neck.
And the neck, that's right. But some women will wear one that doesn't cover the neck. And some women wear, there you can see something that looks more like a niqab that covers much of the face and just has a slit for the eyes. And in some countries now they have burqas that even have mesh screens over the eyes. There's a burqa.
Right.
And scholars generally see that as a much later development. And unfortunately, in some countries, that is actually forced on women by their governments, which is rather unfortunate.
Right. So perhaps Islam faith is like many other faiths where there was an original belief system or an interpretation, and then over time you start to get different strands of the interpreting the original text. And so some have interpreted the Quran saying that this means that women have to have their head covered, their face covered, their eyes covered, to, sort of the different levels of covering. And some believe it's not even required.
That's right. Yeah, so as I say, there is sort of a debate. The main thing is that it does say explicitly in the Quran, there's an actual sentence which is fairly unusual in religious texts, where it says explicitly, let there be no compulsion in religion. So it's said in the Quran, and it's God speaking this sentence in the text. So when you have governments forcing women to do certain things, it would seem to be a fairly clear violation of a fundamental tenet of the faith. So it should be a woman's choice.
Right.
And
and sorry, I was going to say, and I don't want anybody to think that this is just secluded to Islam. I think what I learned from being on the Encounter retreat is that that can happen a lot, even in, say, the Christian faith, where you have a belief system and then a new interpretation is offered and enforced. So isn't that ironic that the Quran is saying there should be no compulsory, no compulsion?
Yeah.
And then here we are, people in the faith being very compulsive over this is the way it has to be.
Yeah, and it is, and as I say, I've never been able to sort of reconcile how they, the countries where that happens, how the religious leaders can reconcile that with a very clear statement, and from a Muslim perspective, a statement by God in the text. I mean, it's God speaking in the text in this instance. So it would seem to be a very clear violation, but humans can do all sorts of interesting things.
A play on words or a reinterpretation, and then really live by that, or believe that they're true. That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, what I would say is that it should be a woman's choice, and in many places, of course, it is. If you run into a person in Canada wearing a hijab, a head covering, 98% of the time it's going to be her choice. There may be rare instances where a father or someone like that is forcing it on the woman, but they are the exception. For most cases, it's a woman's choice, and she wears it for a variety of reasons. The generic answer, and it's a valid answer, is that most women wear it to submit, not to their husband and not to their father, but they see themselves as submitting to Allah, to God, because they believe it's required by God. But like anything, you always have to deal with the individual. Everybody's story is different. And so I've talked to women who wear it, and sometimes I've talked to converts who have put it on and found it quite freeing because it liberates them from the pressures of Western fashion and body shape and, kind of trying to live up to the examples of the models on the covers of the magazines. So they can find it quite freeing. I've talked to others, young women who wear it, whose mother wore it and grandmother wore it, and they wear it the way that so many of us inherit things from our family. I've heard comparisons made with Western women wearing bras that sometimes are not comfortable, but that's sort of what you do. There's other women who will give very sort of religious answers, as I've already given, and there are some women who are forced to wear it in particular countries. And so often what I say to people is if you want to know why a woman's wearing a hijab, it's not always appropriate to ask, but if you know the person well enough, the best thing to do is ask, because every person has their own story.
Right.
And so you don't want to treat everyone who's wearing a hijab like they're carbon copies of one another.
Yeah, that
they've
it's all the same story and that
they've-
it's all the same reasons.
That's right. They're all individuals. They've all got their own story, and so you have to treat each person, as a unique person.
Right. And
Yeah.
yes. And as you say, the example you gave before the break of somebody who had been in a temple, now we can just look at that person rather than looking at their clothing or looking at a story that we think we've already conceived in our head about them. And we can just look and see that they're a person, whether they're wearing a hijab or anything on their head, to see the person first and foremost.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a bit of a tragedy almost because Muslim women have a burden placed on them that I think is quite unusual, which is that, whether she wears a hijab or not, or a niqab or not, there are all of these groups that place enormous importance on her choice of clothing. When you and I get dressed, who cares how I dress? No one cares, right?
Right.
But there are situations in countries and sometimes families where whether that woman wears a hijab or not is like casting a very weighty vote for either the conservatives and the tradition and the true faith, or conversely the freedom of Western society and things like that.
Liberation or whatever.
Yeah, and so here's her personal choice. How does she want to dress? What does she think is the right life for her? And yet there are these two groups that are almost doing war where the battleground is her body. Right. And so one of the things I try to encourage people to do is to try and refrain from dumping their expectations on this person. So it's her body, it's her clothes, it's her choice. And so, Muslim women have this kind of pressure placed on them, this burden of the importance of their choices that is fairly unusual for most of us in society.
Yeah, we can't relate to that because, as you say, we decide what we want to wear, and
Yeah.
we might get complimented or we might not.
Yeah.
But that's about.
Yeah.
But it's not whether we get to stay in the family or not,
Yeah,
or
that's
whether
right.
we get accepted in that town or not.
Yeah, you will not be, enormously judged by your clothes for the most part, but if you're a Muslim woman, you might be, regardless of which choice you make.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, do you know what? We have run out of time already. That
Yes.
time went quickly. Thank you so much for coming in,
Thank
Brian.
you.
And thank you for watching, and I wish you well on your journey of awakening within.